What's up, y'all? It's GC Kinsey, here to share some thoughts about setting goals and reaching milestones and getting older as a trans person. It's my birthday! At least it is while I'm filming this. By the time you see it, it'll be a few days later, but hey, life is too short not to keep celebrating, am I right? My birthday is on November 18th, which means it kind of comes at a weird time for me. And if you're a fellow queer person living in the US, you might know why. It falls right between when we have elections and when many of us celebrate Thanksgiving with our families. And for a lot of queer people, neither of those things typically make us feel much like celebrating. On top of that, I'm trans, which means I get to contend with all the emotions that are brought up every year during Trans Awareness Week leading up to Trans Day of Remembrance, which, if you're unfamiliar, is the day that we commemorate those who lost their lives due to transphobic violence. This day and week always occur in November, usually close to my birthday. In fact, this year Trans Day of Remembrance is on November 20th, so that can also make it a little difficult to feel like celebrating. Throw the COVID-19 pandemic in there and how that's made it impossible to have the kinds of birthday parties I used to have with my friends for the last few years, and things have been looking even less festive than usual. But I do still try my best not to let this other stuff get me down or take away too much from celebrating my birthday, because trans joy is important. And this year, I wanted to do something extra special for the occasion because last year when I turned 34, I made myself a cute little trans pride cake and a promise that I would be on testosterone by the time I turned 35. And now, on my 35th birthday, I am excited to tell all of you that I actually kept that promise. As of right now, I am just under 5 months on T, and I could not be happier that I've taken this step. If you've spent any time on this channel, you may have noticed that I'm not doing the usual progress updates like, this is my voice X months on T, or here's a timeline of my changes so far. In fact, I'm still doing things like wearing fiber mascara facial hair just like I am today, so you can't even really see the changes happening. I am tracking my changes in an untraditional way that's heavily focused on singing, and you will start seeing that on this channel after I've gotten through my first year on T. But at this point, I do want to give a few updates on the changes in my life since starting T, and what it's like to be a 35-year-old trans person, and what my goals are for my next birthday. So join me as I have some cake, very ace of me, I know, and share some thoughts. Part 1. Puberty in your 30s. Puberty was weird enough the first time around, but all my peers were going through it too, so I wasn't alone. Going through puberty in your 30s is a whole different ballgame because you're an adult experiencing something that's typically experienced by adolescents and teenagers. And even though I have other trans friends, I don't have any who are on a similar trajectory or timeline as me with their medical transitions, if they're medically transitioning at all. So I've got a great circle of supportive people I can talk to about Puberty 2.0, but not exactly the same kind of situation I had when I was in middle school and all of my classmates and swim teammates were going through it at the same time. That said, my current puberty is overall going so much better than my first one did, for several different reasons. First and foremost, it makes a world of difference when the hormones controlling your puberty are actually the right ones. My middle and high school years were a particularly volatile time for me emotionally, and I thought that was just par for the course back then. I mean, mood swings are pretty common during puberty. But now that I've had testosterone in my system for comparison, I'm like, oh, never mind. My emotions and moods were so all over the place back then because I had estrogen flooding my body, and my brain clearly runs way better on testosterone. I also think the added maturity that comes from being an adult makes puberty easier to go through as well. My natal puberty ran from age 9 to 18, with the bulk of the changes happening around 11 to 13, and when you're that young, it's hard to process the awkwardness of those changes. Especially when you don't yet have a way to understand or articulate that the puberty you're going through isn't the right one for you. But now I'm older, I'm more stable, I've had more life experience, and even though puberty is still awkward, there's no getting around that, I'm a lot better equipped to handle the awkwardness now than I was back then. And I think another part of the equation is the fact that my natal puberty wasn't something I could control or escape. It was going to happen to me whether I liked it or not. But puberty 2.0 was something I thought long and hard about and knew for sure that I wanted it before I started it. So now I can be excited about it instead of just slogging through it. So no matter how strange it is to be getting oilier and sweatier and a little bit hairier, all the typical teenage boy things, as an adult, and being the only one in my social circle going through this, I still think my 30s are a fantastic age to be going through puberty. Part 2. The in-between phase. A lot of people in the trans community talk about the awkward in-between phase, where you're no longer living as your assigned gender, but you haven't reached your final form as your true gender yet either. That is literally why I have this shirt. But what I'm learning now is that if you transition medically, you might actually end up having 2 of those in-between phases. There's the one between when your egg cracks and when you begin your medical transition, and the one between when you've started your medical transition, but you've still got a long way to go. For some people, those phases overlap into one, but because I'm overly cautious about big life changes, I needed 5+ years of questioning and exploring and socially transitioning before I knew I was ready to start T. And those years were their own very significant in-between phase for me. At this point, I feel like I'm in a whole new in-between phase, because first of all, that's literally what puberty is, but also, now that I'm making permanent physical changes in addition to the more social-oriented changes I was making before, it feels like there's more of this ticking clock of, oh my god, when are people gonna notice? And what's frustrating is that I'm actually getting misgendered out in public more often now than I was before I started T, which just feels wrong somehow. Like, yes, I am on a low dose, so the changes are happening slowly and gradually, but I am still a little bit more masculine every day than I was the day before. So I really don't know how to make sense of this uptick in misgendering. There's a lot of cognitive dissonance in the fact that I am extremely aware of all the ways my body has changed so far and is still changing on T. So when someone misgenders me, it's like, how do you not see that? And then I have to remind myself that the changes are still too subtle for other people to notice yet, even if they are super obvious to me. The fact that others aren't noticing my pronouns, which are super obvious because they're always displayed right on my face, is a whole other issue, but I've talked about that before, so I'm not going to get into it again for this video. Anyway, my first in-between phase, where it was all social transition, was a little bit easier to deal with in some ways because it was all focused on exploration and I didn't have any clear-cut end goals in mind yet. The in-between phase I'm in now feels like a lot of hurry up and wait. I have a much clearer picture of where I'd like to end up, so now I have to wait for the T to keep doing its thing to help me get there, and hope I keep winning the genetic lottery as much as possible. And it's not like I want the changes from T to happen faster, they're happening at a pace I'm 100% comfortable with. It's more like, I know I'm going to be stuck in this in-between phase for a while, and I wish I hadn't taken so long to decide that yes, I do want to start T. Because in hindsight, it is so right for me that I don't know how I ever thought I might want to transition without it. Fortunately, I know that I can get through this current in-between phase because I already got through that first one. And every day is one day closer to where I ultimately want to be. I'm in it to win it now, just gotta keep pushing through. Part 3. Being an older trans person, but not a trans elder. I want to preface this by saying that I don't think of 35 as being older by a long shot. If you ask me, I'm still young. In fact, my 35th birthday is the youngest I've felt mentally since I turned 21. My knees would disagree with me, but my point is, my status as an older or younger person is relative to the space I'm in. And in a lot of the spaces where I'm in community with other trans people, which tends to be through cosplay and fandom culture, I'm usually one of the older ones. Most of the fellow trans people I know are somewhere in the 18 to mid-20s age bracket. I have plenty of cis friends who are also in their 30s, but I know very few other trans people who are 30 plus. One of the reasons I'm so grateful for all of you awesome people who watch and comment on my videos is because I've had the chance to hear from some trans people in their 40s and 50s and even older, which is amazing. But in my day-to-day life and the spaces I inhabit in person, I'm often the oldest trans person in the room. And that feels a bit odd because I'm not what you would consider a trans elder, meaning someone who's been living their truth as a trans person for a long time. I'm actually in a weird space where I'm well past the baby trans stage after 5+ years of social transition, but I am very much still in the baby stage of my medical transition at just under 5 months in. It's those two different in-between phases again. So this puts me in a position where, because of my age, some trans people who are a decade or more younger than me think I have a lot more experience living my life as a trans person or being a part of the trans community than I actually do. So then they ask me for advice, which a lot of times I don't feel qualified to give. The most I feel like I can do is support them as they navigate the stages of questioning and coming out. It's also pretty mind-boggling to know that there are actual trans elders my age. People who figured out that they were trans when they were really young and have been part of the community and even organizing for trans rights for decades. It's equally mind-boggling to think that those of us in our 30s are considered older trans people in a lot of spaces, whether we're trans elders or not. There's definitely a perception that being trans is a young person thing, even though there are trans people of all ages and always have been. So I hope that over time, older trans people get more and more visibility, particularly the actual older ones and not just the youngish older ones my age. And I think it's worth pointing out during and right on the heels of Trans Awareness Week that I hope more of us get a chance to make it to older age as society becomes more accepting and supportive and less hostile toward our community. I also want every trans person to know that there is no wrong age to transition. I see a lot of people much younger than me worrying that it's too late for them. But please listen to this 35-year-old who just recently started T and is now living his best life. And believe me when I say that there's no such thing as too late. There's just whatever age is right for you. Part 4. Birthday Goals. I want to wrap up by talking about my goals for this time next year, and I really just have one. So I'm going to make a promise to myself and to all of you right here and right now. Here goes. By the time I turn 36, I will no longer be living a semi-closeted life. I will be my authentic self 24/7, 365. Because yeah, believe it or not, I still live 2 significant parts of my life in the closet right now. I'm not out to my family, and I'm not out at work. So as much as I am out and proud in every other aspect of my life, I still have to pretend to be someone I'm not almost every single day. And that's been weighing me down for a long time, but especially now that I'm on T, it just feels more wrong than ever. The reason why I'm not out in those situations might seem kind of ridiculous when you compare it to how out and proud I am on this channel, but I know there are a lot of people who just can't handle a trans person's awkward in-between phase that I talked about earlier with any sort of chill. If I come out when my voice hasn't fully dropped yet, if I'm not growing visible facial hair yet, if I don't look trans enough yet, some people are gonna need a lot of reminders about my correct pronouns or even the fact that I'm trans at all. And they'll probably be scrutinizing the physical changes as they do happen a whole lot harder than they would have otherwise. And the last place I want to have to deal with that is at work where I'm just trying to do my job. Or at family gatherings where I just want to spend time with my relatives. I'm extremely comfortable being open about my gender on this channel because it's my own space and I get to set the boundaries. I'm extremely comfortable being open about it with my friends because I know I can trust them to be supportive and not make it weird. I'm extremely comfortable being open about it out in public because I can just leave a space if I get overwhelmed. I can't do that easily at work or at family gatherings, so in those situations I've found it not easier, but the path of least resistance to stay closeted. Now, of course, if I were never medically transitioning, I would have to just draw a line in the sand somewhere and come out, and then deal with the awkwardness of being someone who doesn't look like what others expect for my gender indefinitely. But now that I am medically transitioning, my plan is to wait until the physical changes from T are impossible to hide, and then come out in order to explain them. And at the rate things are happening with the changes so far, I should be able to do that by the time I turn 36. So that's the plan. That's the promise I'm making to myself. Y'all can hold me to it. Also, just as a reminder, much like there's no right or wrong age to transition, there's also no right or wrong way to go about it. Maybe you transition socially, maybe you transition medically, maybe you do both, maybe you do neither and you're satisfied knowing you're trans on the inside without ever transitioning outwardly to the rest of the world. You can approach any or all or none of those steps in whatever order or whatever way you want. My approach works for me, your approach should work for you. And don't let anyone ever tell you any different. And with that, now it's time for me to finish my cake and turn the conversation over to you. How do you feel about getting older, especially those of you who are also trans or some other form of queer? Do you do anything special for your birthday, and if so, what is it? If your birthday brings up difficult feelings for you, do you commemorate other milestones in your life? What are some ways that you set goals for yourself and celebrate your progress and treat yourself to joy? Drop a comment below and let's get a discussion going. You can also reach out to me on other social media. I am GC Kinsey across all platforms. And while you're here, feel free to check out some of my other videos. I've got more vlogs like this one about my experiences as a queer person. I have cosplay music videos, makeup tutorials, pre-testosterone voice recordings, and more right here on this channel. So make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss anything new. And with that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. I really appreciate your support, and I will see you on the next one.